So thanks everybody for taking time to come along. I'm going to talk about the Carcharodontidae proposal this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. So the Carcharodontidae are a large family of sharks that are what I would call very typical sharks. They're quite often the sharks that, when we think about sharks, they're what we envisage. And the picture here is a bull shark, which is a fairly typical species within the family. Now, the family has 56 species. I'll talk a little bit about some of the complexities in that a little bit later, but for all intents and purposes, in terms of the proposal, there are 56 species within the family. And we should note that 2 of those species are already listed under CITES on Appendix II, and that's the oceanic white-tip and the silky shark. Now, the family are fairly typical, mostly coastal, although there are some pelagic species common throughout tropical, subtropical, and even some warm temperate waters. And they're a very diverse group in terms of their size. There is a whole range of small species, some of them less than 70 centimetres in total length, while others get quite large, over 4 metres. And so there's quite a diverse range of life histories, quite a diverse range of sizes. And so that has quite important implications in terms of their productivity and a whole range of other things that we need to think about. And the other important thing is that this is a group of species that it's very commonly caught in fisheries. They use for both their fins and their meat, as well as other products in some places. And so these are often target or valuable bycatch species that are retained by fishers in many parts of the world. And because it's such a big group, I wanted to break it down into some subgroups just to explore some of that complexity and what that means. But also, when we get to the back end of the presentation, just to think about what that might mean in terms of implementation for different nations within our region. And so I've broken it up into 6 groups here: the small inshore, medium inshore, and large inshore. So these are the species that occur on the continental shelves. These are some of the very common species, things like sharp-nosed sharks in that small inshore group, very common across places like Northern Australia, Papua New Guinea, and many other parts of the world. Then the medium inshore, things like the common blacktip or the Australian blacktip, again, very common species across tropical areas throughout the world. Then these large inshore species, things like the dusky shark and the sandbar shark, these are not quite as common, but they do get very large, often over 3 or 4 metres. And then we've got some more specialised groups here at the bottom. So there's a suite of species which would fit into probably the medium inshore group, and they're the species that live on coral reefs. There's a suite of those species, and we'll actually look at those in a bit more detail later on. But for example, blacktip reef sharks, but there's a range of other ones. There's also a group of species that occur in rivers, either well into rivers or in estuaries. The bull shark is the example there, but also importantly, I think the river sharks, or Glyphis genus, is probably the other well-known one there that has some real conservation challenges in some parts of the world. And then finally, there's the pelagic species. We've talked about 2 of those already, the oceanic white-tip and the silky, but the really common one, obviously, is the blue shark. And I just want to take a quick digression, talk about tiger sharks. In some taxonomies, tiger sharks are included in the family Carcharodontidae, but they were removed fairly recently into their own family. And that's largely because they have quite a different reproductive mode than other members of the family Carcharodontidae. And so note that the proposal does not include tiger sharks within it. So here's the proposal. The proposal is obviously to list 54 species of the family Carcharodontidae, those that are not already listed, on Appendix II. If you're interested, and if you haven't seen the proposal, it's available to download from the CITES website. And the proposal focuses on 19 species of those 54, and it's those species that are listed either as critically endangered or endangered on the IUCN Red List. And those 19 species come across a wide range of those different groups within the family. I'm not going to go through the full 19 and those sorts of things, but suffice to say that There's a lot of detail in the individual IUCN Red List assessments, which are available on the IUCN website, and also within the proposal itself. Beyond those 19 species, the other, what's that math do, 35 odd species are included in the proposal as lookalike species. And that's largely to help with the enforcement, because it's very difficult to distinguish between some of these species when they're whole and when they're in product form, either as fins, trunks, fillets, etc. Almost impossible to tell apart many of these species. And I should note that obviously there's quite a large number of nations that have sponsored this proposal. The list is there, including the host country for the COP, Panama. Now, the reason that we see the carcharinids in the sort of shape they are, and they're a group that contains obviously quite a high proportion of threatened species. And in fact, it's about 70% of the species within the family are considered threatened with an elevated risk of extinction by the IUCN Red List. And the reason that the species are in that shape is largely because of the effects of fishing. As I said earlier, they're caught as target or incidental catch. Even when they're taken as incidental catch, they're often retained because of the value of their meat and their fins. And as a result, here's the number, 68% in fact are in a threatened category on the Red List, 19 of those as critically endangered. So the vast majority of these species are really struggling under the pressure of fishing throughout their range. And as I said also earlier, those threatened species occur within all of those groups, from the small inshore ones all the way through to the pelagic ones. But importantly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, those Red List assessments obviously are global Red List assessments, and it doesn't mean that within every part of the range of each of these species that they have that exact status. That's the global status. And so important to recognize that there is regional variation in the status of many of these species. And obviously one of the other things we need to think about in terms of CITES listings is their occurrence in trade. And so we have a figure here from a recent paper. If you want to find the details of this paper, it's actually the first INF document for the COP19. You can find it on the website, and it's by Diego Cardonosa and a team of others. And it basically plots out the occurrence of different shark species within the Hong Kong fin trade. And this is data from fin trimmings. And you can see that there's a whole range of species listed there, and the color of their dot indicates their IUCN Red List status, obviously red being critically endangered, and then going through the green ones are the near threatened and least concern. And if we actually highlight the carcharinid species within this, you can see that they are a very large component of that fin trade in Hong Kong, including many of those threatened species. The two yellowy orange colored ones, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the silky shark and oceanic whitetip, they're the two currently listed species, but you can see that obviously there are a whole range of other species across a range of IUCN Red List statuses that do occur quite regularly in the trade. There's been a number of analyses of the proposals by a number of groups. I'll just quickly lay those out. Details of these are available on the CITES website, some of them from the Secretariat, some as INF documents. The first of those is the CITES Secretariat, and the Secretariat has recommended that this proposal be adopted. Details can be found in that document. The FAO didn't quite have the same take. They noted that the proposal to list all 19 species of the family in Appendix II does not meet CITES criteria as a single proposal, and recommended the consideration of separate proposals for the species assessed to meet Appendix II listing criteria, including grey reef sharks, small-tail sharks, and the Ganges sharks. And then the IUCN traffic analysis basically concluded that the great majority of the species in the family Carcharinidae appear to meet the criteria for inclusion in Appendix II. And it goes on to talk about exactly under what criteria, etc., that they conclude that occurs. Again, all of those analyses are available for getting the details from all of those analyses. But quickly, I want to talk just a bit about implementation, particularly for the Oceania region, because obviously it's a region that is quite complex, and these are species that do occur throughout our region. And obviously there are a number of challenges. This is a large family with many species. They occur across a whole range of habitats and locations. And that obviously brings complexities, particularly in terms of things like the identification of trade products and the developing of non-detriment findings. Just in terms of the identification of products, there are now a really nice range of products available on websites for people to download and access, including some really nice new fin identification work from Rima Jabato and Alex Morata, which you can see there at the bottom. These products are becoming quite sophisticated given the number of species that we're talking about potentially being listed. But it's not just restricted to fin identification. There are also identification guides for carcasses, for example, now, and so a range of products can be identified. The other challenge, obviously, is developing non-detriment findings. These are the documentations that are required to enable trade to continue under an Appendix II listed species or group of species. And when we think about Oceania, I think it's important to note that, particularly for the small island nations within the region, there are really only two of those subgroups that are of relevance, and that's the coral reef species and the pelagic species. Given that two of the pelagic species are already listed, we're probably talking largely about blue sharks as that pelagic group. When you come to something like New Zealand, you would add in probably some large inshore species, and particularly the copper shark, Carcharodontis brachyurus, but also those coral reef species at the Kermadec Islands. Obviously, there are a number of species that occur there. And then for Australia and New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, where there are much more diverse range of habitats and particularly wide continental shelves, there are a lot more species, and the full range of those species obviously comes into play. But in terms of thinking about NDFs, obviously for the small island nations, there's a much reduced species list that needs to be considered. And just quickly, just to look at those reef species in a bit more detail, there are 6 species essentially that occur within that reef species group within the region. The top 2 there, the grey reef shark and the sharp-toothed lemon shark, are both listed as endangered by the IUCN. The next 2 down, black-tip reef sharks and silver tips, and also white tips, so the next 3 are all listed as vulnerable. These are all very common species on coral reefs that are not heavily fished. 2 other species, the bull shark, in some nations, particularly I'm thinking Fiji, does occur in coral reef areas. It's listed as vulnerable. And then in cooler reef areas, particularly those further south in the Pacific, we see the Galapagos shark being quite important. It is listed as least concern, and so one that we have much less concern about its status. And I made the point earlier that the status of species is not even across the distribution. And so this is some new data from the Global Finprint project that I've been involved in. And the figure you can see here on the side of the slide basically shows the depletion level of 3 species of reef shark, and these are all carcharodontids, by nation. And so the depletion level along the bottom, essentially a depletion level of 0, which is on the right-hand side, means that they're in a really healthy state. Depletion level of 1 means basically that they weren't recorded during the survey. And so you can see everything from nations that have very, very healthy populations of these reef sharks to those that don't have very few, if any, of some of these species. And I've highlighted some of the nations from the Oceania region with the orange arrows there. And you can see, by and large, many of these nations have shark populations that are actually in fairly good shape. And so data like that, that is coming from the Finprint project will be of assistance to nations that are developing non-detriment findings for some of these species, should they be listed. And I'm going to leave it there with just a few conclusions, and that is obviously the proposal would list 54 species of sharks that are common in tropical and subtropical waters. Fishing has been the real reason that we've seen these species decline, and 68% are currently threatened with extinction. If the proposal is accepted, there obviously will be some challenges with implementation, but the resources for doing that are growing rapidly, and there is a lot of help for nations out there in that implementation space now. And importantly, in the Oceania nations, there may be a need to consider only a relatively small subset of those species that are included in the full proposal.